All righty, well, welcome everybody. Steve Grove here, Commissioner of Deed, and thrilled to welcome you to the final meeting of Phase 1 of the Governor's Council on Minnesota's Economic Expansion. We're pleased to be joined today by the Governor and Lieutenant Governor, and really the purpose of today's meeting is to review the recommendations that this council has put together for how to look at the next chapter of our economy, and specifically how to spend the remaining ARP dollars we have left in the state budget. It's been a fast and furious few months for this group. It's a great collection of leaders. We know Governor and Lieutenant Governor had a chance to look at some of the materials in advance, but the purpose of today is just to highlight some of the key themes here and then have a discussion about the advice that these leaders have brought forward. I will say you selected some truly great leaders to join this council. Very thankful for their time. And I can say they did not disappoint. We had many great, robust discussions, as you'll hear in a moment from our chairs. With that, I'll turn to my colleagues, Commissioner Robertson and Harpstead, for a brief welcome, and then Governor, we'll turn it over to you. Commissioner Robertson.
Good afternoon, Governor Walz. I am delighted to be here today. Good to see all of the council members. As the Commissioner of Labor and Industry, it has been an honor to work with this esteemed group of Minnesota business leaders to explore ways, some new, some old, on how we can meet the demands to continue to grow our economy. I'm especially grateful for the diverse and dynamic input from the council members representing the multiple sectors that are on the council. I look forward to the implementation phase of the group recommendations to improve our access to childcare, to rethink how we can meet the growing demands for housing Minnesotans, how we will bring broadband to the entire state so that we can all participate in our economy. I'm simply honored. It's such a privilege to work with such a dynamic group. And with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Harpstead.
Thank you, Commissioner Robertson, and great to see you this afternoon, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. In the spirit of not forgetting to stop and celebrate our successes, I just wanted to remind you that last spring, after a series of rapid-fire community listening sessions, we were able to move $1.17 billion of ideas for what we called equitable economy into the state budget, and we're already working on implementing programs that came out of that effort. And so to regroup this fall with this eclectic group of Minnesota leaders with a fresh take on what we are now calling economic expansion, and having a new approach to looking at it and working very quickly through a really strong process to reach this point, it's been just a delight to revisit these kinds of questions and to imagine what we could do together in the future. So today, very proud to be here to have them present their ideas to you, just in time for us to dream big for the next session. Governor Walz.
Thank you, Commissioner Harpstead, and commissioners, thank you. Jeff, Paul, and this entire team, thank you. It's that old cliche about when you need something done, you go to the busiest people. We certainly did that. And I should note, as the commissioners noted, these are brightest minds in Minnesota, and I'm grateful that you would choose to serve the state. Folks on here that deal on a global scale with economics and supply chain issues, to folks that deal with the smallest Minnesotans and their well-being. That whole picture needs to be there to inform us as we move forward. And Commissioner Harpstead's exactly right. The recommendations, observations, suggestions, goals that will come out of this will inform not only those ARPA dollars and our budget and potential policies. This is a unique moment. I think many of you I've heard many of you speak publicly or seen some of your writings, that it's a unique moment to understand what the new economy is going to look like. And I'm kind of hesitant to use the word post-COVID because we may coexist with COVID for a long time, but we will certainly exist and need to understand how that will look. And so I didn't want the cliches of that this is simply opportunities. We wanted the best ideas that could be implemented and make a difference. And we know that the only way to get that is in a true Minnesota tradition, to turn to Minnesotans to to contribute. So I am really looking forward, as Commissioner Grove said, we followed along, but I think phase one here, this is an inflection point, move to phase two, and then already you and many of your organizations already implementing what that world looks like. We are, of course, doing that. And I think I would speak for Commissioner Grove that there was a real sense of optimism about how the world views Minnesota when we were in the UK and in Finland, and the moves that you are asking us to make and that Minnesotans are asking us to make, I think bodes well for us. So certainly grateful. Want to make sure we spend this time hearing from you, but I think I'd like to hear the Lieutenant Governor, if you're on, we'd love to hear a few words.
Thank you so much, Governor, and good afternoon, everybody. I am with you by phone, but we'll be with you via video shortly. Back to my house. I just wanted to also echo the gratitude that the governor shared with all of you, and thank you so much for signing up for this incredibly important work. As we are in this moment, I think as the governor expressed, just the optimism and being with our friends overseas, that kind of optimism is something that we can feel here as well. We can manage a pandemic while simultaneously looking towards the future and being hopeful about what is possible. And you all are a part of that. We know when we set out to outline the goals of this council, we knew as an important group to listen to and ensure that we had a cross section of voices and communities if we were truly going to catalyze progress towards an equitable, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient economy where everyone has opportunity. And this work is difficult, and I know that your timeline was really quite short. So I'm super excited to hear where you landed on this first phase of recommendations. And there are a lot of ways to rebuild our economy and resolve significant inequities and gaps in our systems. And the governor and I are looking forward to hearing your thinking on that. And one of the reasons why we brought this group together and we asked you to have additional conversations with folks across the state is that we know that we oftentimes talk about, this is bringing it back to Marion Wright Edelman. I know that Barty Wacky is on this call, that our children don't come in pieces. Our Minnesotans don't come in pieces. Our families don't come in pieces. And we need to make sure that all of these things are working together. So just interested in what you'll do in phase two as well, and how we can be supportive as you listen and learn from Minnesotans. But just Gitche Miigwech for doing all of this good work. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for those words as we begin. And with that, I'm going to turn over the meeting to our co-chairs who served extremely admirably. We're so grateful for them, Paul Williams and Jeff Ettinger. Paul, over to you.
Good. Thanks, Commissioner, and thanks, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. We're going to run pretty briskly here through a series of slides. I know we don't have a ton of time, but just an overview here. If you can go to that next slide, an overview. Just we're going to talk just briefly about process guiding principles, which turned out to be really important for us, and excuse me. Then some of our top priorities, and we kind of organize those around themes, as well as kind of some more specifics. I just want to say, as everyone has noted so far, huge thank you to this group. Met literally every week for about the last 8-9 weeks, and really took in a lot of really good input and information and data, and then sorted through it all to come up with some, I think, some pretty powerful ideas. It is powerful, as you all know, as much as you travel the state, to hear from these different perspectives and different folks and leaders and perspectives. So it's been a powerful experience, and it's been quick. We'll have some of our council members will present some of the themes, so you hear a little bit from several of us. You can go to the next slide. Just in terms of our charge, the charge that you gave us was big and it was bold. And to identify immediate actions that can be taken by the public, private, and nonprofit sector, to identify policy changes and investments that for potential enactment during the session coming up in 2022, including recommendations, as we noted, on how those American Rescue Plan dollars might be able to be used to advance equitable economic growth. We took that charge seriously, and it was robust. If you can go to the next slide. Just in terms of our process, again, we spent about the first half of our process really hearing from a variety of stakeholders, community members, experts, other folks in different parts of government, used at every step of the way kind of small group dialogues to make sure that we really heard from council members themselves and had a good, robust discussion literally after every single presentation. We then started moving into kind of submitting ideas and getting some specifics on the table, which we then did some narrowing and prioritizing and came up again with kind of this group of themes. Again, a very fast moving process. Didn't necessarily have a ton of time to dig terribly deeply into every one of those topics, but again, very robust process. If you can go to the next slide, just again, this is just a listing of the different presenters that we had, and again, I was just really thrilled to kind of hear from so many different folks, and it just kind of highlights how broad and diverse our learning was. We heard from business, Doug Loon at the chamber. We heard from BIPOC leaders, Marcus Pope and Melanie Benjamin. We heard from entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs, Nawal Noor, Renee Dossman, folks doing some great work in kind of business and small business entrepreneurship. We heard from some of our data experts, Susan Brower, right off the bat, I think was fantastic, a state demographer, other state staff. So we really kind of had a really robust discussion from and a lot of different perspectives. If you can go to the next slide. These guiding principles, as I mentioned, were actually quite important and kind of emerged as we were going through the discussion process. One, how do we use these one-time dollars effectively? Secondly, how do we drive equitable outcomes for those who face systemic disparities? Equity was just kind of constant throughout our conversations. How do we amplify and build on programs that we know work? There's a lot of things in many of these areas that we know, in fact, are already working and oftentimes are rooted in community, that are driven by community. That was a key consideration for us. How do we invest in innovation that kind of builds impact? How do we accelerate some of these longer term changes in some of our systems? That'll be a big piece of our charge in the second phase of our work. And are there cross-cutting ideas and strategies and themes that cut across multiple areas? And how do we look at those opportunities? And so these guiding principles are part of what really led to our ability to narrow down, and that was a tough process. So I'll stop there just in terms of an overview of process. Turn it over to Jeff to talk a little bit about our priority areas, our categories, and specific recommendations.
Well, thank you, Paul, and hello, Governor and Lieutenant Governor. It's very nice to be with you both again. Our council identified 8 themes shown here that emerged as we analyzed what we heard, and these are consistent with our guiding principles. In order of priority, these themes are housing, workforce, entrepreneurship and small business, childcare, infrastructure and technology, healthcare, youth employment and engagement, and community. These themes provide the foundation for the 21 strategic recommendations that are contained in our overall report. Go to the next slide. I'd like to briefly mention our process in narrowing down to these recommendations and priorities. We used a ranking system which would allow for an equal voice for all council members on our themes and recommendations. And we also use this method to select this focused list of ideas representing our highest priorities. These are produce new affordable housing, workforce skilling, reskilling, and upskilling through industry partnerships, create a BIPOC small business ecosystem investment package, ensure broadband access throughout Minnesota, and investments in opportunity youth workforce. And you'll see these 5 priorities sprinkled through the overall recommendations as the rest of our council members present. I will turn it back over to Paul right now.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I'm going to cover just the first the first theme around around housing, and just again the themes and the specific recommendations that you'll see. Again, in some cases we had some financial recommendations and parameters that we were suggesting. Again, these are initial ideas. Lots more work to be done to kind of really narrow that down, and obviously different departments and administration, entities will need to work with that. But if you can turn to that first theme around housing. So no surprise, right? And we didn't hear from any of the housing experts in any of our presentations. Yet when we talk to leaders from communities, when we talk to business leaders, when we talk to providers and different community advocates, we heard housing just kept coming up. Both greater Minnesota metro area, housing as a stable, right, platform for many other things, for economic prosperity, came through as just a very clear issue and bucket of issues. So again, we know that both in terms of the supply of housing in particular was an area that we were quite concerned with and heard a lot about. And that's both the supply of rental housing for very low income folks, as well as worker housing, workforce housing. We also heard about the home ownership gap, and how home ownership actually, we have, as you all know, we have among the largest gaps between Black household wealth and home ownership and the mainstream majority community ownership. That gap is amongst the largest in the nation, and home ownership is a key strategy to economic growth. So supply is what we focused most on here. Our recommendations speak to kind of a surge using ARPA dollars to kind of walk alongside, to complement, to leverage other existing dollars. We talked a little bit with the Housing Finance Agency folks, but our recommendations really focus on creating a surge of those one-time dollars alongside the housing investment bonds that the state utilizes, as well as other MHFA resources. Joe Fowler is here as well, and Joe was going to just share a couple of words as well on the housing recommendations. Joe?
You're muted, Joe.
Thank you, Paul. And as it relates to housing, I'd just like to say increasing the state's involvement in helping to finance in some form or another an increase in an affordable housing supply, whether that's through helping provide some form of gap financing for a project to help it pencil out, whether it's increasing the amount of housing bonds, working with HUD to allow a larger amount of debt for the project to bear out and a longer payment term, or maybe it's working with debt purchasing partners like the HIT or Housing Investment Trust, will all help spread that dollar and expand and stretch that dollar so it's worth more. At the same time, all of these different mechanisms include requiring the prevailing wage be paid for the work that's being done to build these projects. And when a project requires the prevailing wage, which is a critical component of how this system would work, it helps give us a tool to address multiple issues, as Paul had stated, about cross-cutting and addressing it in multiple scenarios. And that includes many of the other issues we've been discussing with access to healthcare, retirement, livable wage, et cetera. Prevailing wage tends to be the livable wage, and it allows our signatory contractors to compete in industry, both multifamily, multi-use market rate, affordable housing, et cetera, that from our perspective of the labor side has been one that has run rampant with some unscrupulous contractors that practice wage theft, worker misclassification, and sometimes even have been involved in labor abuse and labor trafficking, which people are aware of. So having that certified payroll will help address that. And then our contractors, if they're competing or able to compete on a level playing field, employ tradespersons that have access to health insurance, that have the ability to retire with dignity. And these employees have a lower amount of dependence on the social safety net programs that we're trying to bring and build up our middle class so they don't have to rely on. And it helps them build the wealth and the stability that we want everybody who doesn't have that opportunity to have, and to feel like they have a stable career and something that will carry forward. And with that, I would just kick it back over to Jeff, and I want to thank the governor and lieutenant governor for putting me on this, and as well as for providing the staff that helped assist this board. Thank you. And Jeff?
Thank you, Joe. Next slide. So our next initiative is workforce. In Minnesota and indeed throughout the country, a major gap exists between the requirements for available jobs and the qualifications of job seekers. And I saw that this came up during President Biden's visit to our state yesterday. Both of our workforce recommendations attempt to amplify and scale programs that have demonstrated success and that are aimed at reducing disparities in the context of race, ethnicity, and gender. Our council feels that the key to success in workforce development is partnerships. Among the industries eager to partner in this area are technology, construction, healthcare, hospitality, and manufacturing. And then Brett Carter is now going to share how this idea could work in the emerging area of clean energy.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you, Governor Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. You know, I would actually like to think that Xcel Energy is a great representation of all the industries that Jeff mentioned, especially through the economic development lens. And Governor Walz, I heard you talk about the new economy. You know, all of the industries want to partner to enhance our workforce, to drive more jobs in the state, and especially in the underserved neighborhoods. And I think this ties directly in with Paul's comments about home ownership. The home ownership, the beginning of that and then the retention of that starts with a great paying job. And so as we think about the new energy economy, we see a role for Minnesotans to fill many jobs that are forthcoming, from the manufacturing of EVs as these new companies are looking for places to locate their auto manufacturing locations, to EV charger installations, not just in the homes, which are starting to take off, but also across the state. You know, as we look at all the utilities are starting to band together to try and figure out how to build a charger network across the state. The tech expertise across all industries, especially, are going to become more important because digitation is growing for all the companies. And so those skill sets are gaps that we currently have today. And so what we're really looking at is how can we start reskilling some of the workforce that may not be active today, while also looking at the development of talent by adopting students as early as high school to indoctrinate them into really good paying jobs. So Jeff talked a little bit about the multiple industries, but this new energy economy is something that is really burgeoning. It's a very high wealth building space. We would love to partner on that, as well as the other industries that represent Minnesota. So I'm going to just close there. And with that, I'd like to introduce Marcus as our next speaker.
Thanks, Brett. Good afternoon, Governor and Lieutenant Governor. There we go. We got it on the slide here. What the council learned about this area was that entrepreneurs, small businesses, and nonprofits experienced disparate outcomes from the pandemic, especially in the BIPOC communities. Our BIPOC-owned businesses also, we learned, can provide leadership for thriving communities moving forward. Investing in the infrastructure to develop and grow Black, Indigenous, and people of color businesses at all stages and levels is critical to the future of Minnesota's economy. And within that infrastructure, this includes supporting and building capacity for the growing ecosystem of small business development providers across the state that have a specific focus on BIPOC-owned businesses. I do want to emphasize specific focus to call out those providers that have deeply rooted connection within each segment of the BIPOC communities. We must be targeting these investments and not paint a broad stroke across these communities as needs do differ. We also heard that the largest barriers for entrepreneurs across the state is startup capital. So one of the recommendations here, the main one, is that Juhi Pumplin, one of our council members, presented the council with a recommendation that encompasses 6 specific areas where investment should be made. 1, technical assistance, 2, training, 3, small business events, 4, infrastructure for small businesses, including to transfer over to the digital platforms that's needed. 5, direct financing, which include grants, forgivable loans, or other flexible capital. And then 6, cultural corridor redevelopment. These were really critical areas for the recommendation here. Scott, can you jump in and then share more about our other key recommendations here?
Sure. Thanks, Marcus. Governor, Lieutenant Governor, the Commission's next idea is really comes from the fact that we feel we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to accelerate the launch and growth of the next generation of Minnesota Fortune 500 employers and other employers by dramatically expanding the existing Angel Tax Credit program. And this is a real complement to that first idea, because we want to do this with a special focus on matching grants, so that those entrepreneurs who are too often left behind get sort of an extra boost of investment along with that Angel Tax Credit program. So that's the first idea there. And then the other piece is really going along with amplifying and scaling programs that are successful being one of the key guiding principles for us. The Commission supports investment in seed and scale funding for innovation in the government and nonprofit sector, which are often neglected with that kind of funding. So think of the use of our one-time funds being used to accelerate the testing of breakthrough ideas in the nonprofit and government sectors, and also supporting the tripling down on programs that are already gaining traction. So with that, we'll hand over to Barty on childcare.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, Governor and Lieutenant Governor. It is lovely to be able to talk to you all about children today. It's my favorite topic. Early childhood access to childcare is a foundational and multi-generational policy strategy that supports healthy child development. It supports parents' ability to achieve greater family economic security, and ultimately contributes to our broader economy. We know that BIPOC families, families in rural communities, and families living in low-income households struggle to access relevant care, primarily because of cost and the availability, right? Those being the key challenges. Childcare was an under-resourced system prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and while wildly helpful, previous state and ARPA investments have helped support the system during this time. It continues to be challenged because the business model was foundationally challenged to begin with. We are experiencing a childcare and early education provider shortage. Current funding only covers a fraction of the need for ongoing support of childcare providers of all types, whether that's friend, family, neighbor care, licensed family childcare providers, center-based care, Head Start, and school-based programs. The reality is that COVID, as the governor said, continues to affect our labor shortages. It affects our operating procedures, the mental health of staff and children and families and providers as they continue to cope with the uncertainty and the closures required of quarantining, right? Support remains more important than ever if we're to maintain, but dare we even say grow the supply of childcare providers throughout the state, while creating a nurturing, stable environment for children as they kind of contend with this really challenging time. We also, as a council, talked about how equitable access for childcare also acknowledges that communities, oftentimes geographic and BIPOC communities, best understand their childcare opportunities and needs, and how to best meet the needs of children, families, and the different provider types. There's also a growing awareness broadly, if there's one silver lining to the pandemic, that childcare is actually a critical infrastructure to our broader economy and needs to be treated as such. So our recommendations were really tied to supporting more community-driven solutions around improving childcare, particularly in BIPOC and rural communities. To really expand this and support existing programs like the Child Care Assistance Program. And then finally, funding some of the broader supports in the system, right? Funding stabilization grants to childcare providers right now, early learning scholarship, supports for friend, family, neighbor care in this sort of precarious time, as well as school-based, all will address the childcare needs that we have. Now, I will turn it over to my colleague, Neil, who will take it from here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Governor and Lieutenant Governor. It's great to be with you. I want to just speak for a moment about investing in broadband. I know that you've been outspoken about how fundamental broadband is across our state. We know that a lot of money is coming from the federal government in the infrastructure bill, which is great news. But the experts guide us that even with that money coming from the infrastructure bill, it is unlikely to be enough to complete the job. So this isn't a one-time opportunity to use one-time money to truly complete the job so that everywhere in the state of Minnesota, you can get high-speed, affordable broadband access. You know, this council is very diverse across sectors, and almost every sector spoke up about how important and how foundational broadband is. It affects, as we saw in the pandemic, it affects access to education. It affects access to healthcare. It affects workforce development. It affects entrepreneurship. It is literally foundational for the state of Minnesota. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but if you think about our objectives of an equitable economy, but also a good use of one-time money, this is just a slam dunk. And so we would urge you to put this high in your agenda. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda.
Good afternoon. I'm eager to share our recommendations around healthcare along with Penny Wheeler. It's impossible to think about economic recovery from the pandemic without consideration of our healthcare system and those who work in it. Essential workers in healthcare long before 2020 have been understaffed and are now experiencing crisis staffing levels that are burning out current workers and deterring new people from seeking healthcare jobs. Our recommendation is to create a broad set of incentives from raising base wages to, as with the workforce recommendations, establishing labor management cooperation around funding upskilling opportunities for healthcare workers. Women and people of color are the people perpetually disadvantaged and dismissed by our current system, and disproportionately are our healthcare workers. Sometimes the simple answer is the best answer. Invest in those who have historically not been invested in. Work toward closing wealth gaps and address the compounding staffing crisis experienced by our healthcare workers and systems now. And I'm going to turn it to Penny to continue.
Thanks so much, Brenda. Sorry about that. Just to emphasize what Brenda said, I mean, I just talked to an ICU caregiver this week, said every hour, every day, it's getting worse and worse. So these support of our workforce is definitely needed, including funding, we believe, paid family leave, funding the upfront costs of a family leave program, allowing for the flexibility legislatively for those who have already implemented these initiatives, but looking for those who have to take care of a sick loved one and not having to suffer further hardships for that. So we believe that that's important too. Beyond workforce, our highest priority for healthcare was mental health needs, which are exploding and which still suffer from a fragmented system. We would like to do two things: recommend continuing to support an infrastructure of certified community behavioral health clinics, but also expanding the system to a broader ecosystem that supports a continuum of care-based resources, but with a lot of community programs about housing, economic assistance, legal assistance, peer support systems, those community-based programs. And there's some demonstration projects that look very fruitful in doing that. So we'd like to bring that forward too. And with that, I am totally embarrassed that I'm returning it to a colleague that I can't recall on the youth engagement and employment.
It's Tracy.
Yay, Tracy. Sorry about that, Tracy.
Thank you, Penny. No problem. Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, my role is to speak briefly on the Council's recommendation for youth engagement and employment. Your administration has already recognized the importance of Minnesota's youth through your Children's Cabinet and the Young Women's Initiative, so it's probably not a surprise to you that our group as well identified youth as a priority in Minnesota. Youth and young adults experienced a variety of COVID disruptions, including job losses, school closings, family economic instability, and mental health challenges. Youth and young adults are our future, and we know they'll play a critical role in the future of Minnesota's economic expansion. During our meetings with community leaders, our councils heard that paid work and paid internships are critical for youth and young adults. They help develop skills and experience and can contribute to family economic stability. We also heard that some young adults are facing barriers that make it difficult for them to obtain and sustain stable employment. If we can remove barriers to employment, our youth and young adults will have more opportunity to gain valuable workplace skills and get on a path to livable wages. Our recommendation for youth engagement and employment focuses on investing in community-based organizations that tackle the barriers youth face. Among other things, we believe that investments in career pathways, helping youth and young adults recognize and communicate their skills, and supporting paid internships that for those that cannot afford to work without pay are investments that could make a difference. Finally, I hope for two things when I think about the outcome of this recommendation. First, I hope that we'll do whatever we can to involve youth and young adults in the design of solutions that address challenges and barriers they face. I think they're ready for that task and need to be closely involved. Second, I hope that we commit ourselves to finding solutions that truly advance equity and close the opportunity gaps facing young people. We can't gloss over the fact that many of the barriers they face come from multiple sources like race, gender identity, religion, and other sources. The solutions that are developed may look different depending on the intersection of these factors. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nanoko.
Thank you, Tracy. Good afternoon, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. I'm here to speak about the theme of community. To have something as important as this rank last demonstrates how interwoven and critical all of the themes we've raised today are towards a stronger economy in Minnesota. I want to reiterate the important points raised by my fellow council members today around access, equity, and taking advantage of existing and trusted resources. We all see and recognize the important role of essential workers during the past 2 years, and yet Minnesotans who are often overrepresented in those sectors are the ones falling through the cracks. According to my colleagues at the Minnesota Budget Project, roughly 40,000 undocumented workers in Minnesota are in critical roles, such as making sure we all have food on the table in their jobs as farm workers and food processors, or protecting our health and well-being as healthcare workers. There are many barriers to accessing critical funds for individuals and organizations alike, from having capacity to apply, accept, and report on funding, having the expertise to navigate systems that were not designed for folks who have been historically marginalized, to have the knowledge of when and where there's funding available. Layered with these technical challenges are general mistrust of systems that have historically harmed non-dominant cultures in this country, challenges navigating language and cultural differences, and accessing resources to fully contribute to our thriving economy. We have seen that access to relief funds were not equitably available for all. An updated system for human services and expanding innovative family-centered models will first help to ease the unnecessary obstacles towards a quick relief and greater economic security. We also recognize that community organizations, and especially those that support BIPOC and undocumented Minnesotans, are trusted resources within their community, and they have and will continue to play a critical role in supporting, training, and providing skill building to ensure those who have historically been excluded can access the workforce opportunities in today's economy. Thank you so much for your time. I'll turn it back over to Paul.
So thank you, everybody, and Governor and Lieutenant Governor. I mean, you can see, I mean, we've eight themes, 21 recommendations, and we've just literally dipped our toe in the water here in terms of what there's a lot here, and I can guarantee you, community, as Nanoko just said, community being the last, there is a lot that is on the cutting room floor, as they say in the film industry. There's a lot of good work that we will take up, actually, in some larger systems issues that we will take up in our second phase. But these 8 themes are incredibly important. Those top 5 priorities, incredibly important, and all 21 of these ideas, incredibly important. And we really would strongly encourage you to find ways to incorporate them into your budget and your approach to the legislature. I do want to say it's interesting, and the council talked about this actually throughout. It's no coincidence that when we think about the future of economic growth, it turns out that investment in some of our basic needs are critical to that future growth, right? Housing, childcare, healthcare, broadband, youth, right? Community. These are all essential basic needs of a community, right? They aren't the whiz-bang kind of, new futuristic tools necessarily that we often think of when we think about what's the new economy look like and how do we get there. In fact, investment in some of our core basic needs is part of the formula to get there. And I think that's one of the big takeaways that I've taken from this process. So we've got just a few more minutes with you all. Would love to hear any questions, comments that you have. And again, grateful for the opportunity to serve in this capacity and with this group.
Well, Paul, and to all the presenters and the team, I can't tell you how grateful I am. The clarity and focus of what you did, and I think you're right. You may see this list and not think there was anything anything groundbreaking, but clarifying it and putting it into an action plan is what we are asking you to do. And I am incredibly grateful. I think now, as you start to look at phase 2, as we start to think about what the legislative session looks like, I understand my responsibility. I have a narrow skill set. It's to try and build the political will across the spectrum to get some of this done. The one thing I can say is the power of this and the power of this committee to do this is your ability to transcend any of the smaller political issues and get to the heart of what it takes to build strong, resilient communities that are equitable and looking to the future. That's a powerful message. And I think setting through this presentation, the Lieutenant Governor and I have been speaking about this lately, and I saw it in our trade mission to Europe, the power of a positive vision and true plans to how to get there are what are inspiring people. We heard this same type of rhetoric in the UK. We certainly heard it in Finland, hearing it from each and every one of you. And I don't think it's hyperbole for us to look. This might be a once in a generation opportunity with where the state finances are at, where the infrastructure plan coming in, we're going to be able to do infrastructure without taking from the general fund. So that means that other opportunities are still there. But I think it sets the expectations that this needs to be different then. I would echo Neil's point on this. When we can check things off the list, we should. Let's close out the broadband thing. Let's not look to the future. Let's close it out. Let's get it done. It's foundational to what we need to do. And if we look at a sequence of plans or a sequence of things that we can do with both one-time money and structural changes, if we're going to have a tax bill, obviously, angel tax credit's important, and look at that. And I'm telling you right now, listening to it in Europe, whether it's large multinational construction companies or whether it's clean energy startups, they're ready to pounce on where there's opportunities. They're ready to create jobs. We need to make sure that when we're doing that we're creating those opportunities to make sure that it is equitable. I still keep coming back to that. I have a challenge bragging about the state's economic situation while I'm watching inflationary pressures and gas prices and things on family budgets. And I think it's trying to lay out what you're talking about is what does this broader vision look like, at the same time recognizing where communities are coming out of from some pretty dramatic upheavals. So I would just say this is, I guess, what I was hoping for, that we would start to clarify this. And the exercise of doing this sends a strong message to the people of Minnesota because of the nature of who's here and who you consulted. And now I think it's time for us to figure out, and you'll get it in phase 2, where's that path forward? And then how do we get results? And I would really encourage you to think in that regards like you're doing. What can we clear and finally get done after decades of talking about? What can we finally get done in this?
Lieutenant Governor, final thoughts for us? I know we're here. Turn to you.
Sure. Well, I'm just excited to see all of this come together. Some of these ideas are ideas, I think, in concepts and values that we've all held for a long time. But, you know, there's also some new ideas here as well. And I am grateful for that. It turns out people need to have stable housing and childcare and shouldn't have to choose between a paycheck and caring for a sick loved one, and all in investing in BIPOC-owned businesses. Those are all really good things, and I'm grateful for that. The one question that I have, and we don't need to get in a big discussion about it here, but that I'm thinking about is how do these approaches vary when we are talking about folks in the urban core, in suburban and ex-urban, and then in greater Minnesota, knowing that when we're talking about the undocumented community, that looks a little different depending on where you live, and just making sure that we are making those connections to folks and getting them the support and investments in the way that meets the needs of the communities right where they live. So that's something that I'm thinking about. I'm sure y'all are thinking about that as well. But that is one of the questions that I have for this group, but also I think for the governor and myself, as we're thinking about the policy work that we do all the time, that when we talk about One Minnesota, it's not a catchphrase, it's actually making sure that we are working across lines of difference to meet the needs of folks in the communities as they currently exist.
Well, Governor, I know we're at time. Any final words of group before we wrap today?
No, just understand how important this is, and I think making sure this is very public facing, that holds an accountability to make sure this isn't another report that goes on a shelf and we move on. That it's actually what our expectations are, that things change, because each and every one of you were chosen and come from a place where the lack of action is not acceptable. Neither you or the organizations you're representing or the values you have. So please know how much we value this, and now we need to start collectively thinking as you move to phase 2 and we move to the legislative session. I want to set the stakes that this is not just an off-year budget time, but this is a shaping of a generation of Minnesotans going forward that we can do. So really grateful. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the rest of your day.
Thank you.